Hi everyone, happy February. This is my January wrap-up with the introduction of my bookshelf. I mentioned that I moved into a new apartment. This is my new bookshelf that I stole from my parents' house. Sorry, my chair's kind of in the way, but those are actually all my books. I do have them like double stacked back, but I don't have a whole lot of books. I actually probably have more books from the library right now than I do from that I own. I read 14 books this month. These are the books that will be in this video, and these are the ones that will be in the next one. So let's get right into it. I started off, these are in chronological order, so my first read was a 5-star read. It was The War That Saved My Life by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. This book is a middle grade story about Ava, who's 11, and Jamie, who's 9, I think. They live in London at the beginning of World War II. Their mother is quite neglectful, even abusive physically and emotionally, and Ava, who was born with a clubbed foot, never got proper medical attention and never learned how to walk. And her brother comes home one day and says that all of the children are going away to the countryside for the war because London will be bombed. And so her and her brother run away during the night and sort of get lost in the crowd of children going away to the countryside. The rest of the story is them living with a single woman in her home in the countryside. The story is really about Ada learning to love herself, learning to let other people love her, learning, I guess, gaining confidence because she was never given the opportunity to gain any confidence in her previous situation with her mother. And it's just a really beautiful story. I had no expectations when I picked it up, which is I think one of the reasons why I enjoyed it so much. So I don't want to oversell it too much, but it evoked a lot of emotions from me. It made me laugh, it made me cry a lot of times, and maybe that doesn't incentivize you to pick up a book, but to me, as a person who doesn't cry very often in books, I found it to be wonderful to have something be able to elicit that much emotion from me. So I enjoyed it. As an advisory note, I was sort of an overly sensitive child, but I think that it wouldn't have been good for me to read this before the age of like 11 or 12 at least. Maybe I'm overestimating that, but it's not really graphic, but like I said, there's sort of physical and emotional abuse, and it does happen during a war, which there's not a lot of like physical violence that she encounters in that respect, but there's like talk of war. Maybe I'm overestimating that. Like I said, I was an oversensitive child. The second book that I read is The One and Only Ivan by Katherine Applegate. This is also a middle grade book, and it's a very touching and tender story about Ivan, who is a silverbacked gorilla, and a few other animals that are part of a show at a mall in the United States. And it is narrated by Ivan. It's from his perspective, and it has this very sort of somber and muted tone to it that kind of, I felt like communicated this really unromanticized perspective on animals in captivity, and how it sort of causes a loss of spirit for our main character, really, Ivan. I give it 3 stars, and I'm not sure what kind of made me hold back on giving it a higher rating. I think it was really good at doing what it was supposed to, and it is actually based on actual events, and that both made it even more sad and more meaningful. But I would recommend it overall. It was a good book. Moving away from middle grade, the third book that I read was The Odyssey by Homer. Now, I feel like everyone knows the story, a fictional tale from ancient Greece, so I'm not going to talk about that. But my opinion, I gave it 3 stars. It was okay. I'm glad I read it because it's just classic of the Western canon, but I didn't care for it a lot, and I'm not an expert on ancient Greece, but I did study, I had art history classes on ancient Greece, and in order to study the art, you have to know the history and the philosophy that produced that art in order to contextualize it. So I'm a little bit familiar with ancient Greece. Like I said, non-expert, and I don't care for their civilization very much. Perhaps from like a removed academic perspective, then they're okay, but like if I had to pick one period I would never want to live in, it's ancient Greece. I don't like the values or the philosophies of the time period. There's just like a lot of glorification of violence, so much misogyny. Anyway, so I think that a lot of my reservations with the story kind of go back to the fact that I just don't actually like this time period in terms of a narrative sense. Even when it comes to art history, I don't care for ancient Greek art very much. I mean, it's okay, but I'm more interested in the way that it influences like later cultures rather than just like itself. But that's not the point. It's probably fair to mention that I listened to this on audiobook, and I listened to it from LibriVox, which is like a free audiobook service. And because of that, it's just read by volunteers. So it wasn't like professionally done with like a really good recording. And B, I don't even know what translation I was listening to. And I've gotten a sense from, maybe it's from Jean's Bookish Thoughts, or her podcast, probably her podcast, That's Ancient History, which I really like, that there has been a more recent translation, which was done by a woman and it's a translation that's a little bit more sensitive to some of the gendered biased or misogynistic tones that sort of creep in previous translations. Anyway, I think that I should maybe read this again one day in the far future and pay more attention to what translation I'm reading and give it a second chance. But I wanted to read some other books that are based on this book, Circe, for example, and The Penelopiad, is that what it's called, by Margaret Atwood. So I'm glad that I read it. I'm glad that I spent the time to do that, but I didn't personally care for it a lot, you know, as a book. So let's not talk about it anymore. The next book that I read was Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. So this book I feel like has been making its rounds on BookTube, like it's sort of been getting a bit of hype, and I'm not sure exactly what to think about it. It's sort of a perplexing book. This book first was written in Japan. It's about Kiko, who works in a convenience store. She's a woman in her 30s and she works in a convenience store, and it's a bit odd that she hasn't moved on to another job. She has a hard time having authentic and organic human emotion or relationships or just human behavior in general, and so she tends to overcompensate by sort of over-analyzing human behavior and then trying to mimic it. And it is an interesting little book. It's short and I would recommend reading it. What I enjoyed is that there are moments where our main character is so over analytical about behavior that it walks a line that in some moments I found reading the way that she was perceiving the world as really funny, that it was funny for human behavior to be described in this way. And then in other moments it was very disturbing for her to describe the way that she didn't relate to what everyone else seemed to you know, be on the same page about, and that it was sort of alarming that she wasn't. That I feel like that's what the gem of the book is, that are just these moments in her head. But it's quite an interesting book. I feel like it's that on BookTube it's sort of teetering on getting overhyped. I don't want to add to it. I think I give it 3 stars. I quite enjoyed it. I liked that it was short and sweet. I thought it was a very interesting book and unique, and that it knows what it's trying to be and it does it well. But I was definitely left coming away feeling like I'm not sure, you know, exactly what to think of that book, but it was fun to read and I would recommend it. Okay, so the next 2, they're both ones that I listen to while I work. Some of my work is on the computer is a little bit menial, so I'll have something playing in the background, and memoirs are really good. I don't know why, but I found that they're really good. I enjoyed both of these. I thought they were good. They're both female celebrity memoirs. Scrappy Little Nobody by Anna Kendrick and Is Everyone Hanging Out Without Me by Mindy Kaling. So first off, Scrappy Little Nobody. This is about Anna Kendrick. I've watched definitely some of her work and found it enjoyable, but I was mostly interested in picking this up because I know that she had a Tony nomination when she was 11, and I wanted to, like, that kind of thing just makes me instantly interested in, like, oh, what was your whole childhood like? I hadn't realized you were a child actor. And so that made me want to pick up this book, and coming away, I would just have to say that it was very funny. Anna Kendrick she's quite funny, and she also mostly just plays her own character, but maybe sometimes slightly more eccentric. It made me laugh out loud a lot, it really did. The next one is Everyone Hanging Out Without Me. This was a hilarious book, and it made me laugh out loud. Definitely even more than Anna Kendrick's book, but I think I remember more things from Anna Kendrick's book, and I don't know exactly why that's the case. It seemed like it was a lot less about the events of her life, and more just like her writing about thoughts that she had, or like what her funeral was going to be like, or that she might tell a story from her childhood, but literally most of it is just sort of offshoot tangent ideas. Not a lot of talking about The Office. She does a little bit, but not very much, and I would have liked to hear more of sort of that backside of The Office from her. So maybe she talks about that in her next book. I'll maybe listen to that, and then I will know. I also gave this one 4 stars, and it made me laugh a lot, which is what a book like this is going for, so I think it did a good job of being what it was meant to be, and I really enjoyed it. Moving on, so the next one I read is The Northern Lights by Philip Pullman. It starts off in Oxford with Lyra, the main character, who lives at the university and is sort of communally raised there, and it's a parallel universe where everyone has a demon, which is like an animal that is the other half of them, and they're inseparable. And then there are adventures that ensue. There were some things that I really liked about this book and I thought were quite enjoyable, and parts of it where I really enjoyed Philip Pullman's writings. There were a lot of other moments where I was very bored and I couldn't read for long periods of time, and I wish I could jump on the bandwagon of people that read this as a child and loved it, but I had some reservations. But I don't really want to pass judgment until I've read the rest of the series, in part because my biggest complaint is that as it's a 350-page book, the first 250 pages were really boring to me, and I think that was because it was set up for the rest of the book, which I also presume is for the rest of the series, and so I think that I might enjoy the next books more, which will make me appreciate this one more. I give it 3 stars, but I'm giving lots of freedom to change that in the future. But that's where I'll stop for this video. That's the first 7 books I read in January. I'll put the next 7 in the next video, so if you want to watch that, subscribe. Stick around, I'll upload it soon, or if it's already up, I guess I'll probably link it down below. So thank you very much, and I'll see you in a future video. Bye!